The baby was not breathing properly when she arrived. That was the first thing Dante Calvari noticed. Not the woman's soaked dress, not the trembling in her hands, not the fact that she had appeared at the iron gates of his estate at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in the middle of a rainstorm that had turned the private road into a river. He noticed the infant pressed against her chest, wrapped in what appeared to be a man's jacket, and the way the child's small ribcage was working too hard, too fast, too shallow. He was standing at the window of his study on the second floor when the security feed cut to the gate camera. He had been in the middle of a conversation. A very important conversation with 3 men who had flown in from Naples, specifically to discuss the restructuring of a shipping arrangement that moved considerably more than cargo are. And yet the moment the image resolved on the secondary monitor, Dante Calvari, a man who had not felt genuine alarm in 11 years, felt something cold and immediate move through him. He told the 3 men from Naples to get out. They looked at each other. One of them opened his mouth. Out, he said again, and the word had the particular quality that his words sometimes carried. Not loud, not threatening, simply final, the way the closing of a vault door is final. And within 90 seconds the study was empty and Dante was already moving toward the staircase. To her name, he would learn later, was Elena Vasquez. She was 27 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she had been hired 6 weeks ago through the domestic staffing agency that managed all household employees for the Calvari estate. Groundskeepers, kitchen staff, the overnight security rotation, and the 2 housemaids who maintained the interior of the main building. Elena had been assigned to interior maintenance, meaning she cleaned the rooms, changed the linens, polished the fixtures, and largely remained invisible, which was exactly what Dante required of all staff. He did not learn their names. He did not make conversation. He moved through his own home like a man moving through a carefully maintained machine, appreciating its function without concerning himself with its parts. He had noticed her once, only once. 3 weeks ago, on a morning when he had come downstairs earlier than usual, and found her on her hands and knees in the entrance hall, scrubbing something from the grout between the marble tiles with a small brush, her dark hair pulled back, a smudge of cleaning solution on her forearm. She had looked up when she heard his footsteps. Their eyes had met for approximately 2 seconds. She had looked away first, and he had walked past, and that had been the entirety of their interaction in 6 weeks of occupying the same building. He did not know she had a baby. This was, he realized as he came through the front door into the rain and saw her close up for the first time, a significant oversight. She was soaked through, the jacket wrapped around the infant. A man's dark wool blazer, too large for her, water heavy and drooping from her shoulders, had kept the child somewhat drier, but Elena herself was shivering so violently that when she tried to speak, her jaw kept interrupting the words. Her shoes were gone. She was barefoot on the gravel drive, and there was blood on her left foot, not much, but visible even in the rain, a thin red thread running from somewhere beneath her arch. She looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has already used up every other option. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. He looked at the baby. The infant was perhaps 4 months old, small, dark-haired, with an angry reddish bruise along the left side of its face that sent a cold, focused rage threading through Dante's chest like a wire being drawn tight. "Come inside," he said. He called Dr. Ferretti before they had even reached the entrance hall. Ferretti was a retired trauma surgeon who served as the estate's private physician, discreet, unaffiliated with any hospital network, available at any hour, the kind of medical professional that men in Dante's position required. He answered on the second ring. He said he would be there in 20 minutes. He asked about the infant's breathing. Dante described it. There was a pause. "Keep her warm and upright. Don't lay her flat. I'm leaving now." The baby was a girl. He didn't know why he hadn't been certain of that until Elena said, "her," while speaking to the doctor on the phone. And something about the correction landed with an unexpected weight in his chest. He stood in the kitchen doorway, while Elena sat at the long oak table, still shivering, the baby held against her shoulder now, patting the child's back with a rhythmic desperation that looked like prayer. One of the night staff, Marta, 50 years old, who had worked the estate kitchen for 9 years, and was the only employee Dante had ever learned the name of, because she had informed him of it herself on her first day, and repeated it every time she saw him, until it simply stuck, had appeared from somewhere, and was moving around the kitchen with silent efficiency, boiling water, producing towels, pulling blankets from a hall closet. Dante leaned against the doorframe and watched. He watched the way Elena's hand never stopped moving against the baby's back. He watched the way the child's fingers had curled around the collar of Elena's dress, 4 tiny fingers gripping hard, the grip of something that trusted absolutely. He watched Elena's face, which was trying very hard to hold itself together, and was almost succeeding, except for the fine trembling around her mouth that she couldn't quite suppress. "Who did this?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Alina looked up. The answer to that question was visible in her face for exactly 1 second before she put it away behind something careful and controlled. She fell, she said. The silence that followed was the kind that men like Dante Calvary were very good at producing. Not aggressive, not impatient, simply open and total. The kind of silence that makes people feel the weight of what they've just said. Alina's jaw tightened. I was holding her and I tripped. She fell. Dante said nothing. Alina looked back down at the baby. Her hand resumed its slow circling. I just need her to be looked at. That's all. I'll be gone in the morning. He didn't respond to that either. He simply straightened from the doorframe and went to pour himself a glass of water, and stayed. Dr. Ferretti arrived in 19 minutes, which was 1 minute faster than his estimate, which was why Dante valued him. He examined the infant with quiet thoroughness. Checked the bruise, the breathing, the fontanelle, the reflexes, the eyes. And then he sat back and said the bruise was consistent with impact, probably from a fall, but the breathing was more concerning. The baby had a mild upper respiratory infection that had been worsening for several days, possibly longer. She needed steam, elevation, monitoring. She was not in immediate danger, but she had been getting close. She needed a doctor 2 days ago, Ferretti said, and he said it to Elena not harshly but clearly, in the way of a man who believed that truth was a form of care. Elena absorbed this without expression. I know, she said. Dante watched her face, watched her take that sentence and fold it somewhere inside herself, somewhere that already had too many things folded into it, judging by the tightness around her eyes. Ferretti set up a small humidifier he had brought in his bag. He came prepared, always, and showed Elena how to position the baby, and at what intervals to check her temperature. He left a small bag of supplies, wrote down his number on a card that he placed on the table in front of Elena, and then looked at Dante with the practiced neutrality of a man who knew better than to ask questions. I'll check in by phone at 6, he said. Dante nodded once. Ferretti left. The kitchen was quiet except for the rain against the windows, and the soft hiss of the humidifier, and the sound of the baby beginning, gradually, to breathe a little easier. Marta materialized with tea and a bowl of soup that Elena had not asked for. She set them both down in front of the young woman, pressed her hand once briefly on Elena's shoulder, and retreated without a word. Elena stared at the soup. Then she looked up at Dante, and there was something raw and confused in her expression, as though kindness were a language she had not spoken in some time, and was struggling to translate. Thank you, she said. I'm sorry for I didn't plan to come here. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I didn't have anywhere else to go tonight. You said that, Dante said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. This was not something he typically did. Sit at the kitchen table, in the kitchen, midnight, with an employee. But something had adjusted in him since the moment on the security feed. Some quiet realignment that he had not examined yet and was not ready to examine. Tell me why. She looked at him warily. This was the look of someone who had learned to calculate the risk in every sentence before speaking at all. Not the wariness of dishonesty, but the wariness of someone who had been punished for honesty before. Apartment, she said slowly. It isn't safe right now. Why? Another calculation. Another pause, my landlord. She said the word with a particular flatness. He's been demanding things that I'm not going to give him. And tonight he came to the door and he was drunk and She touched the back of her neck, almost unconsciously, and Dante's eyes tracked to the gesture. There was a redness there, partially hidden by her hair. I grabbed Sophia and I left. Sophia. The baby's name was Sophia. Something about the name landed in a different register than he expected. He filed it without examining it. Where is Sophia's father, he asked. The question produced an immediate, total stillness in Elena. The soup spoon in her hand stopped moving. The fine trembling around her mouth returned, more pronounced this time. He's not in the picture, she said. Her voice had gone very careful, very flat. He doesn't know about her. Dante studied her face for a long moment. She held his gaze steadily, which not many people managed to do. There was something both fragile and extremely resolved about Elena Vasquez, a combination he had not encountered often. She looked like someone who had been broken several times and had learned, in the reconstruction, which materials to use. You're staying tonight, he said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a command either. It existed somewhere in the space between those things, a statement of fact about a decision he had already made. Elena opened her mouth, and he could see the refusal forming, the independence, the pride, the careful management of obligation. For Sophia, he said, and Elena closed her mouth. He gave her the guest suite on the east wing. It was the farthest room from his own, which was in the west wing, and it had a sitting room attached where Marta found a laundry basket that served as an adequate temporary crib. He did not examine why he chose the farthest room rather than the nearest one. He did not examine very much of what happened in the next hour, operating instead on the same methodical efficiency he applied to everything. The problem was here. The solution was available. Implement the solution, move on. Except he didn't move on. After Elena had been settled, After Marta had found dry clothes and a towel and had quietly disappeared, after the estate had gone back to its nighttime silence, Dante returned to his study and sat behind his desk and stared at the Naples files without reading them for 45 minutes. His name, in certain circles, inspired a very specific kind of fear. He was 34 years old and he had controlled the Eastern Lombardy network since he was 26, when his father had died of a stroke at the most inconvenient possible moment, and Dante had found himself either the head of a criminal empire or a dead man, depending on how the next 72 hours resolved themselves. He had chosen the former. He had been ruthlessly efficient about it, in a way that had surprised even the people who thought they knew him. Not violent for the sake of it, but precise, strategic, cold in the way of someone who has decided that emotion is a vulnerability and vulnerability is a liability. He had not had a relationship in 3 years. Not a real one. He had not wanted one. He had not thought about children not once, not even abstractly. He opened the top drawer of his desk. At the back of it, behind the encryption drives and the backup phone and the small folded card with emergency contact sequences that he never needed, there was a photograph. He had put it there 4 years ago, which was also the last time he had looked at it. He took it out now. It was a photograph of a woman. She had dark hair and very dark eyes, and she was laughing at something off camera, caught mid-laugh, unposed, her head tilted back slightly. She was beautiful in the way of something uncalculated, not the kind of beauty that had been cultivated, but the kind that simply existed. Her name had been Camila Vasquez. The surname hit him like a fist, which was exactly why he had not thought about it until this moment. Alone, with the rain still going outside and the photograph in his hand and the name Sofia turning over and over in the back of his mind like a coin that wouldn't settle. Vasquez, Elena Vasquez. He set the photograph down very carefully on the desk in front of him and stared at it for a long time. It was 2 in the morning when he knocked on the guest suite door. He had debated with himself, briefly, because he was not a man who debated with himself at length, about whether to wait until morning. He had concluded that he would not sleep either way, and that waiting would simply be a performance of patience rather than actual patience, and he did not perform things for his own benefit. Elena opened the door after the second knock. She was wearing borrowed clothes, odd. One of the guest robes, oversized, her hair loose and still slightly damp. Her expression when she saw him was a complicated mixture of weariness and exhaustion and the particular alertness of a woman with a sick infant who had not slept properly in days. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I need to ask you something," he said. "May I come in?" The wariness intensified. He was aware of how this looked. A man like him, in the middle of the night, at the door of an employee's room. He was also aware that there was nothing he could do about that now. He needed an answer more than he needed her not to be afraid of him. She stepped back from the door. The sitting room was dim. One lamp on, the humidifier still hissing softly, Sofia asleep in the laundry basket with a rising and falling chest that was already markedly less labored than 2 hours ago. Elena sat on the edge of the settee and watched him with careful eyes. He sat across from her. He placed the photograph on the low table between them, facing her. Elena looked at it. The reaction was not what he expected. He had expected surprise, shock, perhaps, or denial. What he got instead was a very slow, very complete draining of color from her face, as though something had been confirmed rather than revealed, as though she had been waiting for this moment for some time and had not quite been prepared for it anyway. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Her voice was barely audible. "I've had it for 4 years, he said. Elena looked at the photograph for another long moment. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at Sofia, asleep in the basket, her small chest rising and falling, her dark hair feathered against the makeshift pillow. "She's your sister. Dante Surmila. She was your sister." Elena's throat moved. She was, past tense. The tense of loss, something cold and terrible moved through his chest. "She died," Elena said, 8 months ago. 18 months after the 2 of you." She stopped, looked at her hands. "After whatever the 2 of you were. We were together for 7 months, Dante said. 4 years ago." He paused. "She didn't tell me why. She didn't tell me anything. She was simply gone." Elena nodded slowly, as though this aligned with something she already knew. "She was scared," she said. "Of what you were. What you did. She loved you. I think she loved you very much, but she was scared." The word loved settled somewhere painful. "She didn't tell me she was pregnant," he said. Elena's head came up sharply. Dante looked at the baby. At the dark hair and the small fingers still curled loosely in sleep. "Elena," he said very quietly. "How old is Sofia?" And in the silence that followed, in the space between the question and the answer, he saw it. Saw the knowledge move across Elena's face like weather. Saw the way she understood suddenly what he was asking and why. Saw the calculation she had been making for 4 months about when and whether and how transform in real time into something else entirely. 4 months. Elena whispered. "Camilla was pregnant when she left me." He said it was not a question. He had already done the arithmetic. Had been doing it since he pulled the photograph from the drawer. She had the baby and she died and she never told me. Elena's eyes filled. She didn't know she was She didn't find out until after she'd already left. And then she was going to tell you, Dante. She talked about telling you. But she was scared and she was sick. And the pregnancy was difficult, and then after Sophia was born she got an infection and it moved fast, and by the time I understood how serious it was Her voice broke. She pressed her fist against her mouth. Dante looked at Sophia, his daughter. His daughter was 4 months old and was sleeping 6 feet away from him in a laundry basket, and had a bruise on her face and had been sick for days and had been in the custody of a 27-year-old woman who had been fighting off a predatory landlord while working a housemaid job in a stranger's estate and had not known until this moment that the stranger was the child's father. The irony was so vast and terrible that it almost had a sound. He sat with it for a long moment, let it move through him, let himself feel the full weight of 4 years, of a woman who had laughed off camera in a photograph, and then disappeared and then died, of a child who existed because of him and had been living in circumstances that bruise, that labored breathing, those days without a doctor. He stood up, walked to the basket, crouched down beside it. Sophia was deeply asleep, her mouth slightly open, her tiny fists on either side of her head in the universal posture of infant surrender. He looked at her face. The bruise was dark along her cheekbone. Her eyelashes were impossibly fine against her skin. He had never wanted children. He had told himself this for years, had arranged his life with the certainty of it. But looking at this face, this particular face, with its particular arrangement of features that he recognized in parts, a nose that was Camilla's, a jawline that might, in another 20 years, be his own, he felt something he had no prior experience of, something that had no tactical name, something that was not logical or strategic or controlled. It was not love, exactly, not yet. It was something that preceded love, something more like the recognition of an obligation so profound it couldn't be refused. The acknowledgement of a claim. Sophia, he said quietly, just the name, just once. Stirred, did not wake. Her small fingers flexed and relaxed. He stood back up and turned to Elena, who was watching him with red eyes and a guarded expression, calculating. He could see what this meant, what it meant for her, for Sophia, what he would do. She stays, he said. Sophia stays here. Elena stood up. Her chin came up with it. She's my niece. She's been in my care since she was She's my daughter, Dante said. And she was sick for days before you brought her here. She had no medical care. You were living in conditions where, I was doing my best. Her voice was suddenly fierce and very quiet, the quietness of controlled fury. I was doing my best with nothing, with no money and no family and a landlord who... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I love her. I have been her only family for 4 months, and I love her, and you don't get to simply I'm not taking her from you, Dante said. Elena stopped. He looked at her steadily. He was still processing, He would be processing this for days. He understood that. But certain things had already become clear to him, the way certain things always became clear to him quickly, the way his mind worked best under conditions of sudden complexity. She needs you. You're the only mother she's known. I'm not going to. I'm not interested in destroying what stability she has. He paused. But she's my daughter, and that changes things. Do you understand? Elena stared at him. The fury in her face was still there, but beneath it something else was moving. Not relief, not yet, but a cautious, reluctant willingness to believe him. What does it change? She asked. Everything, he said. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the study until 4 in the morning, and then he moved through the house to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window watching the rain ease into mist. And he thought about Camilla. He thought about the 7 months they had spent together, which had been. And he was honest enough with himself in the dark of his own kitchen to admit this. The only 7 months of his adult life, during which he had not felt entirely alone. She had been 24, reckless and warm and frightened of him in a way she had never been able to fully hide. And he had told himself that he understood her, that the fear was manageable, that she would learn to see past what he was to who he was. He had believed it. He had been wrong. She had left on a Wednesday morning while he was at a meeting in Milan. No note. Just gone. He had searched for her, had found her. In fact, within 48 hours, had known her address and her new job within a week, and had done nothing about it. He had told himself it was her choice. He had told himself he respected it. He had put her photograph in his desk drawer and closed it, and not opened it again. He had not known she was pregnant. He believed Elena when she said it. He believed it because the alternative, that Camilla had known and had chosen to raise his child in poverty and secrecy, was something he could not accept without breaking something inside himself that was not quite healed enough to break. She hadn't known. She'd found out after she left. She'd been scared and sick and she'd died before she could decide. He thought about Sophia's bruise, 4 months old and already marked. The thought produced a clean, cold, absolute fury, not at Elena, who had clearly been doing everything in her power with very little, but at the circumstances, at the landlord, at the months of inadequate care, not from neglect but from poverty and isolation and the particular vulnerability of a woman alone with an infant and no safety net. He opened his laptop. He sent 3 emails. The first was to his legal team. The second was to the property management firm that handled his residential holdings. The third was to an individual in the HR structure of his various legitimate businesses, a woman named Dr. Reyes who handled employee welfare and who was, he knew, both competent and discreet. He did not know exactly what came next. He had never been in a situation like this before, had never allowed himself to be in a situation like this, had structured his life specifically to avoid this kind of complexity. But the complexity was here now, had arrived in the rain at his iron gate wrapped in a man's blazer, and he was going to handle it the only way he knew how, methodically, completely, without leaving the important things to chance. Alina woke to Sophia's fussing and to sunlight, coming through curtains she didn't recognize, and for approximately 4 seconds she existed in the pleasant nothing of not yet knowing. Then it all came back. The rain, the gate, the kitchen, the photograph on the low table, and Dante Calveri's face when he looked at Sophia, and what she'd said, and what he'd said, And she sat up very fast, and her heart was hammering. She picked up Sophia, who was fussing from hunger and slightly damp and whose breathing, Alina noted with a relief so acute it felt physical, was nearly normal. The labored quality was gone. She was just hungry and impatient, making the sounds she made when she wanted milk. Sounds that Alina had learned over 4 months to decode the way she had learned to decode nothing else in her life. I know, Alina murmured, adjusting her hold, unbuttoning the robe. I've got you. Easy. Sophia nursed and then blinked up at her with black eyes that were. Alina had always known this, had known it from the first time she'd seen Camilla's photographs, from the first time she'd watched Camilla on video call showing her the man she'd fallen for. That were exactly his. Dante Calveri's eyes, dark and precise and giving nothing away unless they decided to. Alina pressed her lips against Sophia's forehead. She stayed there for a moment, eyes closed, breathing in. She had not planned to come here last night. She had grabbed Sophia and run, and the only place her feet had known was the gate at the end of this road, because it was the nearest safe perimeter, the nearest place that had walls and security and resources, and she had not thought, had genuinely not thought, about who owned those walls or what it would mean to appear at them in the middle of the night. Or perhaps she had. Perhaps some part of her had been making a decision she wasn't ready to consciously acknowledge. She had known, for the entirety of the 6 weeks she had worked at this estate, who Dante Calvari was. She had known it before she applied for the job. She had found the agency listing in a moment of desperation. Sophia 3 months old, the rent 2 months overdue, a landlord beginning to make suggestions that made her skin crawl. And she had recognized the address, and she had applied anyway, and been accepted, and had spent 6 weeks cleaning his floors, and changing his linens, and thinking, every single day I should tell him. And every day she had not told him, because she was afraid of what happened next. Because she was afraid of a man like him taking Sophia, taking over, turning Elena into a footnote in a story that had once belonged to Camilla and now belonged to her. She looked at Sophia's face. The bruise was already fading slightly at the edges. It had not been from a fall. Alina had been holding her when it happened, but Alina had not caused it. The landlord, drunk, had grabbed at Alina in the hallway outside her apartment door, had caught the baby accidentally, had not even seemed to notice. Elena had shoved him, had run, had felt the hot, bright terror of seeing Sophia's face bloom red, and had known, finally, that there was no more managing this. There was no more making do. She was not going to tell Dante it hadn't been a fall. She was not ready for that conversation. A knock at the door. She called, just a moment, and settled Sophia against her shoulder, and opened the door. It was not Dante. It was Marta, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the expression of a woman who had seen many things in 9 years of working for the Calvari estate, and had no intention of commenting on any of them. He asked me to bring this, Marta said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. Coffee, toast, fruit, and Alina noticed with a lurch in her chest. A small warm bottle of formula beside a clean burp cloth, perfectly prepared, suggesting someone had looked up what a 4-month-old needed and had acquired it within the past few hours. Thank you, Elena said, and her voice came out less steady than she intended. Marta paused at the door on her way out. She looked at Sophia for a moment, a long, soft, complicated look. Then she looked at Alina. He's in the study, she said. When you're ready. She found him exactly where Marta said he'd be, standing behind the desk rather than sitting at it, a posture she would come to understand was his default mode. Standing, positioned, the desk as a kind of reference point rather than a barrier. The morning light came through the tall windows at an angle that made everything in the room look more serious than it probably was. He looked at her when she came in, and then immediately looked at Sophia, and there was something in that second look that was so unguarded and brief that Alina was almost sure she'd imagined it. A split second of something, a longing or fear or both, before his face resumed its usual quality of deliberate neutrality. "How is she?" he asked. "Much better," Alina said. "The breathing is almost normal." He nodded. "Ferretti will call at 6 to follow up." He paused. "Sit down." But she sat. He remained standing, which she suspected was habitual rather than intentional. "I've spoken to my legal team," he said. Elena's chest tightened. Here it comes. She had spent 40 minutes in the shower, the most luxurious shower she'd taken in 4 months, preparing herself for this. He was going to establish paternity. He was going to petition for custody. He was going to... "I want to be clear about what I'm proposing before you react," he said, as though he had read the tension in her. "I'm not attempting to remove Sophia from your care. I am proposing an arrangement that formalizes what she has now. You, her primary caregiver, a stable environment, proper medical care, financial security." He paused. "And me a father." Alina looked at him. "What kind of arrangement?" "I would like paternity established legally," he said. "I want to be her father on paper as well as in fact. Beyond that..." He sat down then, finally, as though the next part required less formality. "I understand this is complicated. I understand that you have been her family since Camilla died, and that my appearing in the picture disrupts something that you have built. I'm not asking you to trust me immediately. I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to earn it." Alina was quiet for a long moment, looking at his face. He held her gaze without aggression, without the particular brand of intimidation she'd anticipated, without anything except a kind of careful, concentrated attention that was ow. She had to be honest with herself, ow. More disarming than threat would have been. "You're different," she said, "than I expected." Something shifted briefly in his expression. Not quite amusement. "You've been forming expectations of me for 6 weeks while working in my house," he said. "I assumed they weren't favorable." "I knew who you were before that," she said. "Because of Camilla." "Because of Camilla." She looked at Sophia, who had fallen asleep again on her shoulder, full and warm and oblivious to the conversation that was rearranging her life. "She told me about you. Not everything. She never told me everything. But enough. She said you were the most controlled person she'd ever met. She said it was the thing she loved and the thing that scared her." And Dante was quiet. "She said you were kind," Alina added, "when you weren't being frightening." She glanced at him. "I didn't know whether to believe that part. Do you believe it now?" She considered this honestly. "I believe you can be kind," she said. "I don't know how often you choose to be." He absorbed this without deflection. "That's fair," he said. She looked at the photograph, which was still on the low table across the room where he'd placed it last night. "Can I ask you something?" "Les, did you love her?" And then, before he could answer, before she even fully understood why it mattered, "I'm not asking to be unkind. I'm asking because..." She stopped, tried again. "She loved you very much. And she died thinking you didn't know about Sophia. She died in a small apartment with secondhand furniture and a broken radiator. And she loved you very much, and I want to know if it was..." Her voice caught. "If it was worth something. If it went both ways." The question sat in the room for a long time. "Yes," he said finally. His voice was even, but there was something beneath the evenness that wasn't. "I loved her. I didn't know how to do it right, and I was too much of what I am, and I scared her away, and I've regretted it for 4 years. But yes." He looked at the photograph. "Yes, it went both ways." Alina nodded. She pressed her lips together, looked down at Sophia. "Okay," she said very quietly. "Then let's figure out what this looks like." With the next 3 weeks were strange and careful, the way new things are strange and careful. Full of uncharted edges and unexpected silences and moments that didn't quite have precedent. Alina stayed. The East guest suite became, gradually and without a formal declaration, Sophia's room. A proper crib was ordered and arrived within 24 hours, along with what appeared to be a professionally curated selection of infant supplies that made Alina suspect Dante had given someone a list and a budget and let them loose. The formula, the diapers, the small mobile that played soft music above the crib, all of it materialized with a logistical efficiency that might have felt impersonal if Alina had not caught Dante, one evening, standing in the doorway of Sophia's room watching the mobile turn, his face doing the unguarded thing again, the thing she was beginning to recognize as the expression he wore when he forgot to manage himself. He was careful with Sophia. Carefully careful, which was its own kind of thing, not natural, not yet, but deliberate, and deliberate felt like effort, and effort felt like it mattered. He would come to find them in the mornings, always with the particular precision of someone who has identified where a thing is before going to it. And he would stand near rather than hovering, and he would ask how Sophia had slept, and Alina would tell him, and he would listen the way he listened to everything, completely, without visible reaction, filing it somewhere internal. The first time he held her was on a Thursday afternoon, day 9. Elena had been trying to console Sophia through what was developing into a spectacular example of what the parenting books called the witching hour. That hour or two of early evening when infants, for reasons that apparently had no rational explanation, simply decided to be inconsolable. She had tried everything in her repertoire: feeding, changing, swaying, singing badly, the pacifier, the skin contact, the specific bounce walk that sometimes worked. Nothing was working. Sophia was red-faced and furious, communicating her distress with total commitment. Dante appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, drawn presumably by the sustained sound, and stood there for a moment. "She's fine," Elena said, sweaty and slightly desperate. "She does this sometimes. She'll settle eventually." He crossed the room, stopped in front of them. He extended his arms in the positioning that Ferretti had demonstrated briefly on day 2, and Elena, exhausted, fraying slightly at the edges, transferred Sophia to him. What happened next was unexpected. Sophia did not stop crying immediately, but within approximately 30 seconds of being against Dante Calveri's chest, his large hands holding her with the deliberate, careful terror of a man who was determined not to drop something, she began, incrementally, to quiet. Her cries became sporadic, then intermittent, then one final protesting yelp, and then nothing. She pressed her face against his chest and made a small, exhausted, deflating sound, and went still. The expression on Dante's face was awe. Elena would later think of it as the moment the wall developed a door. He looked down at Sophia, and everything that was usually arranged and managed in his face rearranged itself into something she didn't have a word for. "She stopped," he said. There was something almost bewildered in his voice. "She did," Elena agreed. He stood very still, as though movement would reverse it. "What do I do now?" "Just hold her," Elena said. "Keep doing what you're doing." He stood in the middle of the sitting room holding his daughter, and Elena sat on the edge of the settee and watched, and neither of them said anything for a long time. It was during that 3rd week that Elena made a discovery that shifted the quiet, uneasy footing she'd found at the estate. She had been putting Sophia down for her afternoon nap when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring. Then it rang again. She stepped into the hallway and answered. "Miss Vasquez." The voice was male, smooth, and carried the particular texture of someone who had rehearsed being reasonable while meaning something else entirely. "This is Emilio Garza. I believe you know who I am." She knew. Garza was the property manager of her old building. Not the landlord himself, but the man between Elena and the landlord, the one who collected the checks, the one who had, over the preceding months, delivered increasingly uncomfortable messages about the nature of the arrangement that her landlord was proposing. He was 40-something, precisely groomed, and had once put his hand on the small of her back in the elevator, and held it there a beat too long while explaining that situations like hers, a young woman alone, a baby, overdue rent, could be resolved in ways that were mutually beneficial. "How did you get this number?" she said. "You filled out paperwork when you moved in," he said pleasantly. "I still have the file. I don't live there anymore." "I know. You disappeared in rather a hurry, Miss Vasquez. Left a few things behind." A pause. "Including some of the baby's things, actually. I thought you might want them." She did want them. There were photographs of Camilla and Sophia in the hospital in those first weeks. Photographs that could not be replaced. She had been thinking about them and telling herself the photographs were gone and trying to make peace with that. "Leave them at the front desk," she said. "I'll arrange a pickup. I'd prefer to deliver them personally," he said. "I have your new address, as it happens." The cold arrived again, different from the cold of the Messina revelation, and this was more personal, more immediate, the cold of a specific man knowing where she was. "No," she said. "You don't." "The Calvari estate," he said. "Via de Castagni." "That's quite an upgrade, Miss Vasquez." His voice had shifted slightly, the pleasantness developing an edge. "I wonder what the Calvari household knows about the nature of your previous tenancy." She kept her voice very steady. "There is nothing to know. Your landlord disagrees. He feels you left owing more than rent." The edge sharpened. He would very much like to discuss the terms of an arrangement that might address outstanding. "I'm going to stop you there," Elena said. Her voice was flat now and very quiet, and she felt something in her own chest that she recognized as something she had learned from proximity to Dante. Not rage, not fear, but the calm of someone who has decided that a situation is over, and is now proceeding with that decision. "I don't owe anything to your landlord except a month of unpaid rent, which I will pay through a solicitor. I have no interest in arrangements. Do not contact me again." She paused. "And understand this, I am not alone anymore, and the people around me do not respond well to this kind of pressure. You would be wise to communicate that to whoever you work for." There was a silence. "Miss Vasquez," Garza said, and the pleasantness was entirely gone now, replaced by something flatter and less polished. "I would be careful about making that kind of statement. You are living in another man's house. Whatever protection you think that affords you." She ended the call. She stood in the hallway for a moment, her phone in her hand, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went back to Sophia's room, and stood over the crib watching the baby sleep with her hands fisted beside her ears. peaceful and entire and unknowing. She did not tell Dante about the call. Not because she was hiding it all. She told herself it wasn't hiding. It was managing. It was the reasonable assessment that Garza was posturing, that the threat was empty, that the last thing she wanted was Dante Calvari's particular brand of response to a slumlord's errand boy. She told herself this convincingly enough that she almost believed it. Garza did not call again. The week passed. The quiet continued. But something had changed in her chest. Some wire pulled slightly tighter. Some sense of the world outside the estate's walls that had been temporarily suspended resuming its background hum. She was not afraid for herself. She was afraid of the shape that fear took now. The fear that was not about her own safety but about Sophia's, about Dante's, about the thing they were building being damaged before it was finished. She had not known, until she had something to lose, how much heavier that kind of fear was. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday. It arrived in the form of a phone call that Dante took in his study with the door closed, and Alina would not know the content of the call for another 48 hours, but she felt its aftermath felt it in the tightening of the atmosphere of the house, in the way the security personnel moved more deliberately, in the way Dante's face went back to its full management mode and stayed there. That evening at dinner, they had begun having dinner together. Not by formal arrangement but by the gradual drift of their schedules, sitting at the kitchen table with Sophia in the mechanical swing beside them, the two of them eating and occasionally talking in the way of people discovering, with some surprise, that they enjoyed each other's company. He said nothing about whatever had changed. He asked about Sophia's appetite. He listened to Elena's answer. He helped clear the plates. Elena watched him and said nothing. She had been piecing together, over 3 weeks, a more complete picture of Dante Calvari than either the fearful mythology or Camilla's loving sketch. He was not what she'd been afraid of. He was also not entirely what Camilla had described, or rather he was all of those things in different ratios than Elena had imagined. He was controlled, yes, but the control was not coldness. It was the opposite of coldness. She was beginning to understand. It was a rigorous, deliberate containment of something very warm, because he had learned, somewhere along the way, that warmth was the thing that could be used against him. He was also quietly funny, which surprised her every time. He had a dry, spare sense of humor that surfaced occasionally in very small doses, a single sentence or half a sentence, and then submerged again. And she found herself waiting for it more than she admitted. She had been trying, with moderate success, not to think about him the way she was occasionally starting to think about him. This was a complication she did not need. The second evening after the phone call, she found him in the study at 11 at night, not working, just sitting, which was unusual enough to stop her in the hallway. She had been going to the kitchen for water. She had not expected the study door to be open. "Sit down," he said, without looking up. She did. He looked at her then, and she saw it, the strain that had been hiding behind his management for 2 days. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "About the phone call," she said. He looked at her. "You noticed. You're very different when you're worried," she said. "You become more controlled, which for most people is less controlled." Something moved through his expression. Almost the door again. "Aldo Messina," he said. "He runs a competing network in Western Lombardy. He has been out for the past year. There have been negotiations about territory that have not gone well. He is an impatient man." He paused. "Has found out about Sofia." The cold came fast. "How?" "Someone in my organization talked. I don't know who yet." His jaw was tight. "He's aware that I have a child. He doesn't know her name or her location, but he's aware she exists." What does that mean? But she knew what it meant. She had known, on some level, from the beginning of being here. From the moment she understood what this man was she had known that the safety of his walls came with a cost, that the price of proximity to Dante Calvari was the acquisition of his enemies. "It means I need to move you," he said. "Both of you. Not permanently. I have a property outside Lecco. It's more remote, better fortified, trusted staff only. I can have you there by tomorrow morning." "How long?" "Until I resolve this." He said it simply, without drama, in the voice of a man who was accustomed to resolving things. "And if you don't resolve it quickly?" He met her eyes. "I will resolve it quickly." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Are you telling me this so I understand the situation, or are you as quiet for a beat?" "Both," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to understand. I'm asking because, He stopped. Something shifted. "She's your family too. Your input matters." Your Elena noted this, stored it. Let it mean something it was increasingly difficult not to let mean something. "Okay," she said. "Lecco. But I want updates." "You'll have them. And I want to know when it's safe to bring her back." "I'll tell you myself," he said. The house outside Lecco was beautiful in the way of things that were built for security rather than beauty and had acquired beauty accidentally. Stone walls and a private lake and tall firs that created a privacy screen along the perimeter. a small staff of 4 who moved with the practiced quiet of people who understood what they were guarding. Elena arrived with Sophia at dawn and stood at the window of the main bedroom watching the lake go silver with morning light and felt, despite everything, a complicated peace. Dante had driven them himself. He had been in the back seat for most of the 2-hour drive, laptop open, working, while Elena sat beside Sophia's car seat and listened to the baby make the small sounds she made while being carried in a car, not quite asleep, not quite awake, surfing the motion with her eyes half closed and her small mouth moving. At one point Elena had looked over her shoulder and found Dante watching them from behind the laptop, and he had looked away, and she had turned back around and her heart had done something she told it firmly to stop doing. He stayed for 2 hours. He showed her the security features of the property, the emergency contacts, the protocols. He knelt on the kitchen floor and played an experimental game of peekaboo with Sophia that made the baby produce the single laugh Elena had heard from her so far. A sudden, hiccuping, whole-body laugh that transformed Sophia's entire face, and that made Dante look up with an expression of such pure, unmasked astonishment and joy that Elena had to look away. He left at 9:30. He said he would call that night. He did. He called at 9:15, earlier than she'd expected, and they talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. Sophia's schedule, the property's amenities, a book Elena had found on the shelf that she'd been meaning to read. And she was aware, toward the end of the call, that they had crossed some kind of line, had moved from the pragmatic management of a shared situation into the territory of simply wanting to talk to each other, and that neither of them was addressing it. She was also aware that she was, against every rational argument she could produce, falling in love with him. This was the worst possible timing, and the most inconvenient possible truth, and it sat in her chest like something that had been building for a long time and had finally found the room it needed. She didn't sleep well. Sophia slept perfectly, which was a pleasant reversal. The call came on day 4 at Lecco. Not from Dano, from Marco, his second in command. A man whose voice Elena had learned to recognize from the times she'd heard him at the estate. A voice that had a particular quality of calm, an emergency that was the auditory signature of someone trained to deliver bad news efficiently. "He's fine," Marco said immediately. Before anything else, Elena gripped the phone. What happened? Messina's people had moved faster than anticipated. There had been an ambush on a route that shouldn't have been known. More evidence of the informant in Dante's organization. 2 of his men were injured. Dante was unharmed, but the situation had escalated, and they were in lockdown, and Marco was calling to, "I want to talk to him," Elena said. "He's in the middle of, I want to talk to him." A pause. Then Dante's voice, slightly clipped, slightly compressed, but his, "Fine," he said. "I heard," she exhaled. Pressed her hand against the wall for a moment. "Are you actually fine?" "Yes." "Don't tell me what you think I need to hear. Tell me if you're actually fine." A longer pause. "Shaken," he said finally. "Which I was not expecting." His voice had gone quiet. "I've been in dangerous situations many times. I don't usually—" He stopped. "I thought about Sophia. In the moment, I thought about Sophia and about it. He stopped again. "About you," Elena thought. She didn't say it. "Come home when you can," she said instead. "We'll be here." He came 4 days later. He arrived in the late afternoon, unannounced, the sound of the car on the gravel bringing Elena out of the kitchen, where she'd been at the table with Sophia doing what she called the talking game. Narrating the world to the baby, the colors of things, the names, the way the light moved on the wall, because she'd read somewhere that constant language exposure was foundational, and she had taken this information with the seriousness. She took everything related to Sophia. She came around the side of the house and he was standing by the car, and the first thing she noticed was that he looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. A bone, deep, not sleeping tired that he hadn't had time to manage before arriving. The second thing she noticed was that he was looking at at her and Sophia, with the full unguarded expression. No management, no arrangement, just his face doing exactly what it felt like doing. "Elena said," he said. Sophia from Elena's arms, extended one fist in his direction, the reaching motion she'd started making recently toward things she wanted, and made an imperious sound. Something happened in Dante's face. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and took Sophia from Elena without hesitation, with none of the careful terror of 3 weeks ago. Just took her, settled her against his chest, and the baby grabbed his collar with both fists and pressed her face into his neck, and Dante stood in the afternoon light with his eyes closed for a moment. Elena watched him, watched the exhale, watched his arms tighten fractionally. She had thought, over the past 4 days, about what it meant to love someone who occupied the position Dante occupied, who carried the risks he carried, who had enemies that were real and dangerous and moved in the dark. She had thought about Camilla, who had loved him and been scared and run, and she had thought about herself, who was not Camilla, who had survived things that Camilla had not survived, who had spent 4 months utterly alone managing the impossible and had found that she was capable of it. She was not going to run. "I need to tell you something," she said. He opened his eyes, looked at her over Sophia's head. "The bruise," she said. "When I arrived, I told you it was a fall." She held his gaze. "Wasn't. My landlord he grabbed at me and caught Sophia accidentally. He didn't even realize it." She paused. "I was afraid of what you'd do if I told you the truth. I was afraid you'd She stopped. "I'm sorry. You deserve the truth." He was very still. "His name?" he said quietly. "No," she said, just as quietly. "That's not what I'm asking for." The stillness stretched. She could see it. Could see him. The man who could make a name into a sentence. The man whose version of resolution would be swift and total and she watched him choose. He looked at Sophia. Back at Alina. He closed his eyes for one long moment. When he opened them, the particular steel quality had shifted into something harder to name. "Is he in a position to reach you?" he said. "He doesn't know where I am. I'll make sure he can't find out." A pause. "Through legal means." She recognized what that cost him, the last two words. "Thank you," she said. "You could have told me," he said. And there was something in his voice, not anger, but something adjacent to hurt, which was, she was learning, a thing he almost never showed. "From the beginning, I would have. I didn't know what you would do," she said. "I was figuring out what kind of man you were. And now." She looked at him. At Sophia asleep against his chest. At the tired, real, unmanaged face of a man who had thought about his daughter in a dangerous moment, and had come here at the first opportunity, and was standing in the afternoon light with both arms full of something he hadn't known he needed. "Now I know," she said. The resolution of the Messina situation took another 11 days. Elena would learn the broad strokes later, that Dante had identified his informant, had dealt with the betrayal with a precise strategic coldness that inspired neither retribution nor further treachery, and had then turned to Messina with documentation, financial evidence, and a set of options that made the costs of continued aggression calculable and evident. Messina was not a stupid man, only an impatient one, and stupid and impatient were not the same thing. He chose the option that cost him less. The lockdown ended on a Thursday. Dante drove to Lecco himself again and arrived before lunch and found Alina in the garden with Sophia, who was discovering grass for the first time. Was being held in a sitting position by Elena's hands, both chubby legs straight out in front of her, one fist clenched around a blade of grass that she was examining with the scientific intensity of someone who had just been introduced to the concept of grass and found it worth investigating. He sat down on the blanket beside them without ceremony, in the particular way he had developed over the past weeks of simply being present, of not making an announcement of it. "It's over?" Alina asked. She nodded. "Look back at Sophia. She's discovered nature," she said. "She's not sure about it yet." He looked at Sophia, who had transferred the grass to her mouth and was now being forestalled by Alina's gentle extraction. "There's something I need to ask you," he said. She looked at him. His face had done the thing again. "The door. I want to ask you to come back," he said. "Not as a member of staff." He stopped, started again. "I want to ask you to stay, both of you. I understand that asks a great deal. I understand I am not an easy situation. I understand that what I am carries risks that I cannot entirely eliminate." He paused. "But I also want you to know that I have spent the last 3 weeks thinking about what I want, which is not something I typically allow myself to do. And what I want is..." He looked at Sophia. "Is this, whatever this is becoming." Elena was quiet for a moment. "That's a very careful way of saying something," she said. He looked at her. And then, as though the carefulness had been a strategy that he'd just decided to abandon, he said, "I'm falling in love with you. I don't know how to do it any better than I did it with Camilla. I might make the same mistakes. I'm more controlled than is probably good for a person, and I have a complicated life, and I am aware that you have every reason to say no." He paused. "But I wanted to say it plainly." Alina looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light came through the fir trees at a particular angle, and Sophia made a small sound of protest at the loss of her grass, and the lake in the background was perfectly still. "I'm already in love with you," Alina said. "Which I'm aware is a problem." He looked surprised. Which, she thought, given that he was a man who prided himself on reading everything correctly, was gratifying. "Why is it a problem?" he asked. "Because you're going to be annoying to love," she said. "You're going to be controlled in ways that frustrate me and closed off in ways that I'm going to have to work around, and there are going to be weeks like the last 2 where I don't sleep properly because I don't know if you're safe." "Yes," he said. "All of that is accurate. But I've been in love with you for about 2 weeks and I've been trying not to be, and it's not working." Something happened in his expression that she had not seen before. Not the door. Not the unguarded thing, but something new, something that was the combination of the two, something that was both open and steady at the same time. "Come home," he said. She looked at Sophia, who had given up on the grass and was now leaning backward to look at the sky, arched dramatically, clearly delighted by the experience of upside-down trees. "We'll come home," Alina said. The day they returned to the estate, something had changed in the quality of it. It was the same house, same iron gate, same gravel drive, same entrance hall with its marble floors that Elena had once scrubbed on her hands and knees. But it received them differently. Or she received it differently. It was not a place she was employed in and not quite certain of her status in. It was a place she was arriving at. Marta met them at the door. She looked at Elena and then at Dante and then at Sofia, and something settled in her face. Something that had been waiting, Elena realized, to settle. "Dinner's at 7, she said. "I made the pasta." And she walked away, which was the highest expression of approval Marta appeared to have available. That evening, after dinner, after Sofia had been put to bed in her crib in the room that was now unambiguously hers rather than the guest room, Elena stood at the window of the sitting room and looked out at the night garden, lit by low ground lights, the shapes of the hedges visible in the dark, peaceful in the way of things that belonged to themselves. Dante came to stand beside her. They stood without speaking for a while. This was something they'd gotten good at, the not speaking together, the comfortable weight of shared silence, which was something Elena had not had with anyone in a very long time. "I want to tell you something," he said eventually. "About Camilla." She waited. "I have been, thinking about what it means that she didn't tell me," he said. "I've gone back and forth between hurt and understanding. I've been at moments angry, which I recognize is not useful." He paused. "But I've arrived at something. She made the choices she made from fear and from love, and I understand both of those things now in a way I didn't when she left. And he stopped. "I want to thank you for bringing Sofia to me, even without intending to, even in the rain in the middle of the night. You brought my daughter to her father, and I don't think you understand yet how much that means." Elena felt the tears before she was ready for them. She pressed them back with some effort. "She would have told you," Elena said. "Given time, she would have found the courage." "I know," he said. "She would have loved." Her voice caught. "She would have loved seeing this. Sofia here, you being," she exhaled, "you being this." He was quiet. "I know that too," he said, and his voice had the quality it sometimes had when he said things that cost him odd. Even, contained, but bearing weight below the surface. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He was very still for a moment, as though the gesture had surprised him, and then his arm came around her, and that was that. The month that followed was the quietest month of Elena's life since Sofia was born, and also the fullest. She had not known, until she had the comparison, how much of her previous 4 months had been spent in a state of low-grade emergency. Managing, calculating, surviving, holding everything together with the specific focused tension of someone who could not afford to set anything down. Now she set things down. One by one, the financial anxiety, the physical fear, the loneliness, which had been the heaviest. She watched Dante learn to be a father. Watched it happen in real time, which was an extraordinary thing to witness. The careful man becoming less careful in the right directions, learning the schedule, learning the language of Sofia's sounds, learning to move through the house at the particular slow and steady pace that didn't startle her, learning that Sofia responded to his voice in a specific way, went still and attentive when he spoke nearby, as though there were a frequency in it that she was tuned to. There was a morning, 5 weeks after coming back, when Elena woke at 7 and Sofia was not fussing in her crib, which was unusual enough to make Elena check the monitor, and the monitor showed an empty crib. She went down the hall, slightly alert, and found them in the kitchen. Dante standing at the counter in a shirt and bare feet, which was a version of him she had not encountered before, and found startling for reasons she didn't investigate. Sofia in the crook of his arm, both of them looking at the window where the morning was coming in. He was talking to her in a low voice, the narrating tone, the language exposure approach that he must have observed Elena using, and Sofia was doing the serious face thing she did when she was genuinely paying attention. Elena stood in the doorway for a long time before either of them noticed her. "She was awake," he said when he turned and saw her. "I can see that," Elena said. Sofia turned at Elena's voice and immediately performed the full body lean in her direction. The recognizing lean, the mother lean, and Elena took her. But the transition was smooth now, practiced, a handoff rather than a retrieval. "Coffee?" Dante said. "Please," Elena said. She sat at the table with Sofia and he made coffee, and the morning came fully through the windows, and this was the life, Elena thought. This specifically, this exact kitchen and this exact light and these exact people. This was what it looked like when something broken finished being rebuilt into something it had never been before. They were at the dinner table on a Sunday when Sofia said her first identifiable sound. She had been making sounds for weeks. Experimental consonants, vowel explorations, the general vocalizing of a baby who was conducting linguistic research. But this was different. This was intentional, directed, said twice in a row with the particular emphasis of communication. She was looking at Dante. "Day," she said, and then looking still at him. "Day." The table went very quiet. Dante sat perfectly still. Elena watched his face go through something that he made no attempt whatsoever to manage, a total uncontrolled series of expressions, Something like shock, something like undoing, something that arrived at the end at the unambiguous and undisguised face of a man who was, in this moment, entirely without defense. "Day," Sophia said again insistently, and reached both arms toward him. He picked her up from the high chair with both hands, and held her up in front of his face, and looked at her. And she looked back at him with her absolute dark eyes, completely confident in what she'd said and who she'd said it to. "Hi," he said to his daughter. His voice was not steady. "Day," Sophia said with satisfaction. Elena pressed her fingers to her mouth. Marta, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel, turned abruptly and went back into the kitchen. From behind the door came a sound that might have been a cough. Dante lowered Sophia to his chest and closed his eyes. His hand covered the back of her head. Elena watched him hold his daughter and breathe, and the tears came this time without any possibility of holding them back, and she didn't try to. After a moment he opened his eyes and looked at Elena across the table, and he looked like himself, fully himself, the real version of himself, the version that existed underneath every system of control and management and strategic reserve. And he said, "Thank you." She shook her head. "You found each other," she said. "I just brought her to the gate." "Elena," his voice was very quiet and very certain. "You are the reason she is here. You kept her alive. You brought her to me. You are—" He stopped. His voice was doing the weight-bearing thing. "You are not just her mother. You are Og. You are the thing that made this possible. Do you understand that?" She did not entirely have language available, so she nodded. Sophia, oblivious to the emotional weight of the moment, had grabbed Dante's collar and was attempting to eat it. The autumn came to the estate with the particular beauty of northern Italian autumn. The chestnuts along the drive turning, the mornings cold enough for breath, the light going amber and low in the afternoons. Sophia learned to roll over. She learned to sit unassisted for approximately 4 seconds before toppling. She discovered her feet, which appeared to be the most astonishing thing she had yet encountered. She grew in the way infants grow, visibly, apparently overnight, so that Elena would sometimes come into the room and feel a moment of startled recalibration. The 4-month-old who had arrived in a man's blazer replaced incrementally by this 7-month-old person with a personality and preferences, and a very clear sense of what she wanted and who she wanted it from. Dante's business did not simplify. That was not a thing that happened. Elena understood now. The complications did not resolve into permanence. They shifted and reconfigured. There were evenings when he came to dinner with the managed face on. When something had happened, or was about to happen that he was processing alone, Elena learned to read the specific quality of those silences all. Which ones needed space, which ones needed presence. She got better at the presence. She sat beside him and didn't ask, and sometimes after a while he'd start talking, and sometimes he didn't, and she made peace with both. "I want to ask you something," he said one evening in early October. They were in the sitting room, the fire lit, Sophia asleep in the next room, the estate quiet around them. He had been reading, or performing reading while actually doing something else, which she recognized by the fact that he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Elena set down her own book. "Ask." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him assemble something. "I want us to be a family," he said, formally, legally. "I've been thinking about it I have wanted to ask for several weeks. I wanted to be sure I was asking because it was right, not because," he paused, "not because I needed the certainty of it. I wanted to want it for the right reasons." Elena looked at him. "And have you determined that you are?" "Yes," he said simply. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, which he was still wearing, which meant he had planned this, had been carrying this through dinner, and produced a ring. Not ostentatious, a single dark stone, something deep and serious, something that looked like it had been chosen specifically rather than appointed. "I want Sophia to have the life she deserves. I want to be her father in every sense. And I want—" His voice was very level, very deliberate, but there was something beneath the level that was neither of those things. "I want to spend the rest of my life building something with you. You are the most courageous person I have met. You loved Camilla. You love Sophia. You have shown me what it looks like to love someone properly, without condition, without self-protection." He paused. "I want to learn to do the same. I want to learn it with you." Elena looked at the ring, looked at his face, looked at the fire, thought about the gate in the rain, the photograph on the table, the morning on the grass in Lecco, Sophia's face when she said duh. Thought about Camilla, who had loved this man and been afraid and run, and who had died hoping that some version of this was possible, and who had left behind a daughter who was currently asleep 8 feet away, dreaming infant dreams, entirely unknowing and entirely beloved. "Yes," Elena said. She said it without condition, without calculation, without the particular careful warding, off that she had been practicing for most of her adult life. She said it like a woman who had decided, fully, to be present for something rather than afraid of it. He slid the ring on her finger. Then he held her hand in both of his and looked at it for a moment. And she understood how. She could read his face now, had learned its private language, That what he was feeling was something he did not have a prior experience of, some form of safety that he had not permitted himself. The particular weight of a door held permanently open. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not the first time they had kissed. That had been 3 weeks ago, tentative and brief, and followed by approximately 6 hours of pretending it hadn't happened before acknowledging it had. But this one was different. This was the kind of kiss that is also a promise, the kind that arrives after all the long and difficult work of becoming honest, and it landed with the full weight of everything that had preceded it. Outside, the autumn night pressed quietly against the windows. The fire burned low. Inside the next room, Sophia slept. The weeks that followed had their own texture. The practical architecture of a life being formally built, the legal paperwork for Sophia's paternity, the adjustment of the estate and its rhythms to the new reality of it. Marco, who had been Dante's right hand for 6 years, shook Elena's hand the first time he met her properly and said, "He's different?" As though this were a complete sentence, which it was. Dr. Ferretti came for Sophia's 7-month checkup and declared her in excellent health and told Elena she had done a remarkable job, which made Elena have to look at the ceiling for a moment. Dante told her more over time. About his father, the Empire, the 26-year-old who had found himself either a leader or a casualty and had chosen, and what that choosing had cost. About the things he regretted. About Camilla. Told her more, and in the telling seemed to release something, a weight he had been carrying not with resentment, but with the particular kind of grief that has never had a witness. Elena told him more too. About the 4 months after Camilla died, the impossible arithmetic of a baby, and no resources and the decision to find work, the recognition of the address in the listing, the 6 weeks of cleaning his floors while carrying a secret that grew heavier by the day. He listened to all of it without interruption, which was the greatest courtesy he knew how to pay, and at the end he said, "You should have been terrified," and she said, "I was," and he said, "Of me," and she said, "Yes, and also of everything else, but you most of all," and he said, quietly, "I'm sorry for being frightening," and she said, "You're less frightening than you think," and he almost smiled, which was the expression she loved most of all his expressions. One morning in November, Elena woke to find Dante already awake, which was normal, and Sophia already in bed between them, which was becoming normal. The baby had developed a preference for the larger bed, and had a way of communicating this preference, before sunrise, that neither of them had found a way to argue with. And she lay still for a moment, not quite awake, listening to Dante reading something to Sophia in a low voice from a small board book. It was a book about animals. He was naming the animals with the same exact attentiveness he gave to board meetings and threat assessments, and Sophia was making sounds at each animal, and the two of them were conducting this between themselves without any awareness that Elena was awake. And it was the most domestic and ordinary scene imaginable, so ordinary it should not have made her feel the thing she felt too, a huge, clean, enormous thing, love and grief and gratitude all at once, for Camilla, for Sophia, for the rain at the gate, for all of it. She opened her eyes. Dante looked over. His expression in that moment was the open door, and the warmth behind it, and the steadiness all at once. "The duck," he told her, indicating the page, as though this were a normal thing to wake up to. "I see," she said. Sophia grabbed the book and tried to eat the duck. "No," Dante said, with the particular gravity he sometimes brought to conversations with the baby, as though the situation warranted it. "That is not for eating." Sophia reconsidered and then attempted eating it again. "She disagrees." Elena said, Dante said, but he was smiling, the full smile, which was rare and which transformed his face into something almost boyish. Something that she thought must be very close to the face he'd had before he became what he'd become. She reached over Sophia and put her hand on his face, and he turned to it. And that was the whole of that morning, quiet and complete. The ceremony was small. Dante had offered large, in the way that men like him sometimes offer large things, not out of performance but out of a desire to mark the reality of something to make it undeniable, documented, witnessed. Elena had said small. She had said the people who actually matter. Who actually mattered: Marco and his wife, Marta, Dr. Ferretti, 2 of Elena's friends from her life before. Women who had thought she'd disappeared, who cried when she called them, who said, "We didn't know where you were," and she'd said, "I know. I'm sorry, come meet my family." They were married on a Saturday in December at the estate. The entrance hall, which Elena had once scrubbed on her hands and knees, was full of winter light and a modest arrangement of white and green, and the sound of Sophia making her opinions known from the arms of Marta, who had appointed herself in charge of the baby for the duration of the ceremony and permitted no interference. Dante stood at the front of the hall looking at Elena as she came toward him, and his face was entirely open, not arranged, just his face receiving her, the real version of it, the version she knew. She had written her own vows. She read them from a card because she'd been honest with herself about whether she could say them from memory without losing the thread. "I came to your gate on the worst night of my life," she said, "carrying the best thing in my life, not knowing that you were what she was missing, and not knowing that you were what I was missing. I was afraid of you. I was right to be afraid of some of it. I'm not afraid of this. She looked up from the card. I am going to love you impatiently when you are too controlled and too careful. I am going to love you loudly when you go quiet in the wrong direction. I am going to love Sophia with everything I have for the rest of my life. And I am going to love the fact that she calls you Day, and I am going to be grateful every day that that my sister trusted you enough to love you. She stopped. Held. This is the life I wanted and didn't think I was allowed to have. I want it with you. I want all of it. Dante's jaw moved. He took a slow breath. Then he spoke without notes, which she had expected. He would not have prepared notes, would have found the words by arriving at the moment and seeing what they were. I have spent most of my adult life building structures that would keep me safe, he said. Walls. Systems. Distances. I was very good at it. I was so good at it that I lost. I lost the person who might have taught me to stop. And that is a grief I will carry honestly for the rest of my life. He paused. And then you arrived. In the rain. With my daughter. He looked at Alina, then at Sophia in Marta's arms, then at Alina again. And everything I had built suddenly had a different purpose. Not to keep things out, to protect what was inside. He was quiet for a moment. You are the bravest person I have ever met. Not because you are fearless, Aud. You have told me exactly how afraid you have been. And that is the bravery, walking toward the thing you're afraid of. You walk toward me. I intend to spend the rest of my life being worth that. He paused. And I am going to love you in every imperfect, overcorrected, carefully inadequate way I know how, and I am going to keep learning better ways, and I am going to love Sophia every day of her life. I promise you both this. Marta made a sound at the back of the room. Marco said, under his breath, something in Milanese dialect that Alina didn't catch, but that made his wife press her hand over her mouth to hold in a laugh. The officiant said the words. They said the words back. The ring Elena had been wearing for 2 months was joined by another. You may kiss, said the officiant, who had a slight expression of someone moved against their professional expectations, and Dante kissed her with both hands on her face and his eyes closed. And it was the kind of kiss that was also a beginning. Sophia was 10 months old at Christmas. She had 3 dedicated words by then, which she deployed with authority at Dante Ma, which she used for Alina, and something that sounded like te that she used exclusively and pointedly for Marta, and which had made Marta sit down abruptly on the kitchen stool the first time it happened, and require a moment. She was pulling herself upright on furniture, investigating the physics of standing with the methodical commitment of a small scientist. She had opinions. She had a preferred blanket. She had discovered that dropping things from a height produced a sound, and that this sound could be reproduced indefinitely, a discovery she pursued with enthusiasm. On Christmas morning, she sat on the living room floor, in the square of light from the tall windows, surrounded by wrapping paper that she found more interesting than the toys it had contained, and she looked up at the 2 people who were watching her. Elena cross, legged on the floor beside her, Dante in the chair nearby with his coffee, both of them doing what they were increasingly good at, simply being present without need for anything else, and she smiled. The big face, whole-body smile that she had, the smile that crinkled her nose and showed her 2 teeth and transformed her entire self into pure unfiltered joy. She looked at them and she smiled and she made her arms go up. Elena picked her up, stood up, walked to Dante. He set the coffee down and took Sophia with one arm and put the other arm around Alina, and the 3 of them stood in the Christmas morning light in the house that had once been a machine and was now something else entirely. Outside, the grounds were white. The iron gate at the end of the drive stood open. It was the best kind of day, unscheduled, unstructured, requiring nothing of anyone. The particular luxury of having nowhere to be that you already are. Dante pressed his lips to the top of Alina's head. Sophia grabbed his ear with both hands and held on. Alina leaned into him, her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, which was steady and even and entirely real. She had brought a baby to a gate in the rain, and found a father and a husband and a home. She had given Camilla's daughter back to Camilla's love. She had been afraid and gone toward it anyway, which was the only kind of brave that actually counted. The fire in the sitting room was lit. The coffee was warm. The morning stretched out ahead of them, long and quiet and belonging completely to itself. Sophia said, with great confidence. Yes, said Dante, and his voice was full and certain, the voice of a man who had found the right answer to a question he hadn't known how to ask. Yes, I am. And the house held them, all 3 of them, on a white Christmas morning in the light. We end. There was one afternoon in late October that Alina would return to for the rest of her life, not because it was dramatic it wasn't but because it was the moment she understood something she had been approaching from every direction without quite arriving at. She had been carrying Sophia through the downstairs rooms of the estate, the baby restless and between naps and needing motion, and she had ended up in the long corridor that ran between the study and the east wing, a part of the house she didn't often move through, because it had the quality of belonging to Dante specifically, lined with closed doors and a particular kind of quiet that suggested the rooms behind them contained things that were private. There were photographs on the wall in the corridor, black and white, framed formally, the generations of the family that had lived in this house. Men who looked like earlier iterations of Dante, and then an older version in color, his father, unsmiling, the same jaw and the same eyes, but without whatever it was in Dante's face that could, under the right conditions, become warm. At the end of the corridor, there was a single door that was half open, and through it came the sound of Dante's voice. Not speaking to anyone, she realized after a moment, or not to anyone in the room. He was on the phone, and from the quality of his voice she understood he was speaking with Marco, and the conversation was not about strategy or business. It was about Sofia. She stood in the corridor without meaning to eavesdrop, but the words came through before she could move away. "She's starting to recognize when I come into the room," he was saying. "She does this thing. She stops whatever she's doing, like she's paying attention." A pause. "I don't know how to describe it." Another pause. "No, I'm not going to describe it further. I simply wanted you to know that it's happening." Marco said something she couldn't hear. Dante said, and there was the edge of the rare dry humor. "I'm not asking for your commentary." Another pause longer. I know, Marco." His voice had shifted into something she had not heard in it before, a softer register, almost private. The voice of a man talking to someone who had known him through the years before he'd learned to manage everything. "I didn't understand it until now. What you said about your children, about the thing that changes I didn't understand what you meant until now." A long pause. "Yes," he said, "yes, exactly." And she moved away before she heard more, and she stood in the main hall with Sofia on her shoulder, and the sound of the estate around her, and she thought, there it is. That is the man Camilla loved. That is the man who was always underneath the walls. Not the controlled strategic presence, not the machinery of efficiency and deliberate coldness, but this, a man calling his second in command at 4 p.m. to say in as few words as possible that his daughter had started recognizing his presence. She had not understood, until that moment, the full scale of what Camilla had left behind. Not just the man, not just the relationship, but the version of him that could exist when he trusted enough to stop performing invulnerability. Camilla had seen that person and had loved him, and had been too frightened to stay for him, and he had put a photograph in a drawer and spent 4 years in a kind of voluntary emotional suspension, maintaining the machine, keeping the walls until a rainy November night cracked the whole structure at its foundation and let the light back in. She pressed her lips to Sophia's hair. "Your mother loved him," she told the baby very quietly, and she was right to. "And I think she would be I think she would be glad." Sophia made a sound against her neck, a warm, humming sound, the sound of contentment. Elena held her, and let herself feel it, the grief for Camilla, still present and still real, and beneath it something else entirely, not guilt, not the sense that she had taken something that wasn't hers, just love, distributed across the people it belonged to, expanded by the presence of this small person who was somehow both the loss and the continuation, both the ending and what came after. She heard the study door close at the end of the corridor. She heard his footsteps approaching. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. "I wasn't eavesdropping," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "What did you hear?" "Enough," she said. His expression shifted, the door, the warmth, the steadiness. He crossed the corridor and stood beside her, looking at Sofia. His hand came up and touched the baby's back, the habitual gesture, the checking and touch she had watched develop from the careful, deliberate hold of the first night into something completely natural. "She's getting heavy," he observed. "She really is." Elena agreed. They stood side by side in the afternoon light from the high window at the end of the corridor, their daughter between them, the house quiet around them, and it was enough. It was, Elena thought, exactly enough.